Welcome to this recorded webinar presentation on online AGMs during social distancing. Hello, I'm Andy Ty. I've been working in the election sector for over 2 decades, helping organisations transition to digital elections. I'll be giving the presentation today. I'll be stepping through the following topics: the challenges facing organisations currently and also in the months to come, how you can become an inclusive organisation, how you involve the wider audience in the decision making, specifically to do with the voting aspect of the AGM, the potential benefits that digital and remote AGMs can give, and then we'll go through some key points. So the key challenge that organisations face in undertaking their AGMs is to make it valid. And to make it valid, you need to conform to your articles of association or constitution, of which they may have been written some time ago, and they may have legacy elements in that give you limited flexibility in running your AGM and making it valid. These may include items such as having a large quorum, i.e. a certain number of people that need to attend to make the meeting valid. They might talk about timescales. Typically, you need to run your next AGM within 15 months of running your previous one. It might talk about people voting by show of hands. It might specify place or location, and it might also talk about or detail that or words to the effect that in person applies, and I'll come on to talk a little bit about that in the next slide or two. At this point, I think it's worth just classifying some definitions for this slide deck. A hybrid AGM means that there are clauses within your articles that allow for remote attendance and remote voting at the AGM. For non-hybrid AGMs, your articles will not have that flexibility. They will not have clauses in there that allows remote attendance. So there's limited flexibility in undertaking remote voting or formal attendance remotely at the AGM. However, there are some things that we can suggest here. Another term we're going to use is proxy, and you'll see that throughout the slide deck as well. And a proxy, as a definition, means that somebody that is able to vote has given voting instructions to somebody else to cast on their behalf at the AGM. So I might be eligible to vote, and I might give my voting instructions to somebody that's going to attend on my behalf, and they'll be able to vote on my behalf based on the instructions that I've given them. So that's the term for proxy. Now, throughout the next slides, you'll see these terms highlighted in red or green. Where they're on those slides, then the contents of that slide applies. So that's just a helpful tip as we step through. It might be useful then to think about what a non-hybrid set of clauses in your articles or constitution might look like. So here is an example of a non-hybrid clause. I'll just read it out. A general meeting shall be called at least 14 days notice in writing at the least. The notice shall specify the place, the day and the time of the meeting, and so forth. So the key word in this particular article is the place, and that's pretty restrictive because these terms, as I've been told and I understand it to be by many legal people over the past few weeks, is the place has to be a physical place and cannot be construed or interpreted as a virtual place. So this is a key word to look for within your articles, just to see if that term is there. If it is, you need to have a physical location where people will meet and undertake the AGM. Here's another clause that you may find in a non-hybrid style set of articles. No business shall be transacted by any meeting unless a quorum is present. 10 persons entitled to vote upon the business to be transacted, each being a member, shall constitute a quorum. Now remember, the quorum is the defined number of people that need to attend the meeting to make the meeting valid. So you can see here we've highlighted the text that's really key. It's basically saying that 10 people need to be present, and present again is construed or interpreted within law as being physically in a particular location. It cannot be defined as somebody being in attendance or present virtually. So where you've got such clauses, these are reasonably restrictive. In this particular instance, they need 10 people to be in a place and present to make the meeting valid. However, all is not lost if you have such clauses, such non-hybrid clauses such as quorum being present at a physical location, because under the current COVID legislation, there is a clause essential for business, and quorum meeting for an AGM has been confirmed as being essential for business. So you can, in this case, send 10 people to a physical location as long as they conform to the social distancing, whatever that is at the current moment in time, then they can meet in a physical location. So those 10 people currently could meet as long as they're 2 meters apart, they can be in the same place, and they can have that meeting. The quorum is met, they're in the same place, that's met, the meeting would be deemed to be valid. And there's nothing to stop you streaming the meeting to the other members to watch that meeting if necessary. So there is light at the end of the tunnel. If you've got these non-hybrid clauses, you can still meet and make the AGM valid. Let's now look at hybrid clauses. So if your articles have got these type of clauses, you fit into the hybrid category. So we've plucked a couple of articles out of the model rules text of the Companies Act 2013. It was last updated in September 2018, but these clauses give great flexibility to organisations to undertake their AGMs in a virtual context. So the first words that we've highlighted here allow the directors to make whatever arrangements they consider appropriate. So that's really giving the directors the ability to say, well, this is an exceptional circumstance, we're going to do this and this process to undertake our AGM. So that's really good. The next clause has some excellent words in it that basically say that it doesn't matter if 2 people are in the same physical location or not, they are deemed to be in attendance at the meeting. So with these 2 clauses, the AGM can be run however they deem fit, as long as they, meet the general processes of allowing people to speak and vote. And also they don't need to all meet in the same location. So, this gives great flexibility. If you've got these type of clauses, then you're hybrid. If you've got the previous clauses we're talking about, you're non-hybrid. Being an inclusive organisation for your AGM is pretty key. There is current guidance from the Chartered Governance Institute, and these apply to hybrid or non-hybrid processes. I've taken 3 excerpts of that are relative to voting, so I think it'd be quite interesting to go through those. So the first one is that obviously organisations need to ensure members are kept regularly updated and regarding the AGM and given their right to vote. So what that means is that even if you're having an AGM that is a quorum, people still should have the right to vote. And you might think, well, how do they do that? Well, bring point 2 into play. Proxy voting should be encouraged, and specifically online voting to preempt any disruption to the postal service. So there is a method potentially where voters could vote ahead of the AGM and give their instructions to somebody that's going to be in attendance so that their vote can be cast at the AGM. And in all cases, you can live stream the AGM. So even if you've got a quorum of 10 people going, say, you can still live stream that. If you're going to be running a hybrid AGM and you've got remote voting clauses and remote attendance and you're going to stream it, that's great, you're going to stream it so everybody can see. So trying to be inclusive during this time is some of the guidance that's been put out to make sure people aren't disenfranchised from the process when they're a member. how do we get the wider audience involved in that decision-making process in voting? Well, for those non-hybrid type articles and organisations that have those, the only route that members have outside of the quorum is a proxy voting process. So this means that there needs to be something in place that enables members to submit their vote and get that vote validated at the AGM. And of course, the quorum members, the people in attendance, can vote in the normal way as they normally would do at an AGM. But the other members would have to use a proxy voting route. That's the only route available to them. If you've hybrid and you've got hybrid clauses, then you can still do proxy voting, which is absolutely fine. But of course, you've got the option to do some real-time voting at the AGM with the members even remotely watching that. They have the ability to remote as long as you've got the systems and things set up to do that. Then it's a possibility for people watching the broadcast to vote in real time as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about proxy voting at this point, because proxy voting is a key method in which hybrid and non-hybrid type clauses and articles enable the members and the key stakeholders to vote in the AGM process prior to the AGM. So as I mentioned earlier, it enables and allows eligible voters to provide voting instructions and give permission to another person to cast at the AGM on their behalf. And that process is normally opened up weeks before the AGM so that those instructions can be collated and then enabled at the AGM when it runs. As a consequence of that, the proxy process would normally close 48 hours before the AGM is undertaken so that the administration of all those proxy instructions could be undertaken, collated prior to the actual AGM running. And if you look in your articles, you may find a clause in there that talks about the proxy process closing 48 hours before the AGM anyhow. It seems to be quite a standard clause in the model rules, so worth checking on that one. There are some considerations for proxy voting. Again, this applies both to non-hybrid and hybrid type articles and clauses. We're recommending that the voters that submit their proxy instructions should be encouraged to nominate the chair as their proxy. And this makes complete sense because the chair, if it's going to be a valid meeting, will always be there. You don't have to name them because the chair might vary. I don't know, maybe the chair is a particular individual and that individual couldn't make the AGM for whatever reason. Somebody else will take the role of the chair. So if the instructions are given to the chair, regardless of who that is, those votes that are pre-done by the people given the proxy instructions will always be included in the final count. Some organisations allow a proxy to be given to another member. They may still give the right to do that as part of the proxy process. However, if that member is not part of the quorum, they won't be allowed into the meeting. They're not allowed to go there under law anyhow because they won't be able to travel under the business is essential clause of COVID. So giving the chair the proxy instructions means that it would definitely be included within the count. Point 2, only those forming the quorum should attend in person. I just mentioned that, the essential for business COVID aspect only allows the quorum members to travel under that particular legislation. The chair has the right to refuse entry to people that are not in the quorum as well. So if somebody did turn up, the chair could legitimately say, well, I'm sorry, we can't let you in because effectively you're not part of the quorum. So I think that guidance is pretty clear and should be enforced where possible. If the nominated proxy does not attend and the proxy vote is not counted, okay, yeah, so this comes back to the point I'm making about the chair. So yeah, that person has to attend that's been given that proxy vote for the vote to count. If they don't attend from whatever form the attendance is made, that vote cannot be included in the final count. Proxy voting can be undertaken online or by post. I put by post in because it can be. Under the current circumstances, you're most likely to undertake that digitally, but there's no reason why you couldn't do it by post if postal services deemed to be running effectively. And you can do a hybrid of that as well. You don't have to do one or the other. You could mix that up. And then of course, think about how voters are supported during the proxy voting process. They may not have undertaken such things before. They might need a bit of help of understanding what that is. So there might be some comms needed. And just to reiterate this, I mean, a lot of this guidance has come from the Chartered Governance Institute, so good to refer to them. Oh, and whilst I'm on that point as well, the Chartered Governance Institute have put their guidance out, and they've had input from all sorts of legal organisations that get involved in AGMs, and even one government department, the Government Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, has had input into this as well. So it's reasonably formalised. It's had a lot of people looking at it, so the guidance is pretty watertight in terms of where we're at the moment. You might be interested to learn how online proxy voting works. I've described the process here. It's a 4-stage process for the voter, but essentially they are sent an email with a one-time use only link that takes them to the voting page for them to access the proxy voting system. They use the credentials in the email that they've been sent to validate themselves and use the one-time use only code that they've been sent, and they'll enter this into the voting website. Once their code has been validated and it hasn't been used before, then the voter can go on and make their selections on how they want their vote to be cast at the AGM. They'll also identify who they want to act as their proxy. So that might be the chair, or it might be other people that are, their details can be entered into the system so that that is all captured. When the proxy voting process closes, a proxy report is created detailing the number of votes being cast for each motion or resolution and who has been given the proxy instructions. A side benefit of using online proxy systems is that they can track the number of people using it, and you can look at this in real time to see progress of the proxy voting process over a period of time, and use it to determine if you need to remind people or certain groups of people that they need to get on and start making their proxy instructions. We've just covered the proxy voting process. We'll now move on to the real-time voting process. So this only applies if you've got hybrid clauses in your articles or constitution that allow you to do real-time voting at the AGM or at the time of the AGM. And it allows eligible voters to cast their vote during the AGM whilst the AGM is running. People can be given the option to go in and vote during the point where the AGM is running and make their votes and cast them remotely. Obviously those people that are present as well could go online and do that, or they can cast them in the normal way, and that would apply of course to the quorum. And the voting can open or close as the chair dictates. So these are real-time processes that mean that the chair could say I'm going to open the voting now, and the voting would open, and the chair may say I'm going to close it, and it would close at that point in time. So this is how real-time voting generally would work. There are some considerations for real-time voting. The first is how the quorum will be met. So some articles allow for the quorum to be made up by those people remote, or some say that you must be in attendance. It might be considered to have best practice to have 2 people at least in a physical location. Even if you've got a quorum of 10, say, have 8 remote and 2 a physical location, so that the meeting could be deemed to be not 100% online, which is open to some interpretation at the moment. Hence why it's called hybrid, so you can have part and part. But you can still live stream the AGM, and you need to think about how you would do that. There are no real constraints on that. There are lots of systems out there: Zoom, WebEx, GoToMeeting, 8x8, MS Teams, that you might wish to stream the AGM over, and all of these give good flexibility and are well proven systems for streaming stuff online. Need to consider how you'd manage any Q and questions and answers session. Some of these systems have chat facilities, some systems have the ability for people to raise their hand, and you flip over to their video stream and you can hear them talking and they can ask a question, or you might ask for questions to be submitted ahead of the AGMs, but that's your choice. Need to consider when voting opens and closes, especially if you're doing real-time voting. You need to give the tech team some indication of when that's likely to be. Is it at the start of the meeting? Is it at the end? You also need to think about how much time you give members to be able to go on to the system and cast their vote. Giving them 30 seconds or so to cast their vote may not be long enough. But you probably don't want to give them half an hour, because that'll be far too long. Some people have considered opening the voting as soon as the AGM starts. The first thing that the chair does is say, we're now opening the voting, and they'll close it at the end of the meeting, so it gives people the entire meeting to cast their vote whenever they so choose during the period of the meeting. But that's open to how you want to do it in your own circumstance. You also need to consider the time for the results to be verified and counted by whoever's doing that, and when and how you will announce those results. You may want the results to be announced at the meeting before it's closed. You need to give the team time to verify and count those results, especially if there's proxy votes that they need to just do a check to make sure that nobody at the meeting is voting that's already submitted a proxy vote. So there's some dedupe processes that are undertaken just to validate that before the final count is made and declared. Some people or some organisations have said, well, we'll close the meeting and we'll just put the results on the AGM up on the website as soon as they become available, and they just let people know that. But that's up to you. Your circumstance dictates. And then finally, you may, for minuting purposes, want to put a registration process in place so that you know who's watching the AGM and who's involved in it, so that you can show that a group of people or certain members were involved in that AGM process. So a pre-registration process for the AGM is certainly going to be quite a useful exercise for knowing how many people are likely to be watching, and are they valid members? Do you want to restrict it to a certain group, or you might just open it completely to the public and anybody can watch it? But in most cases you probably want to restrict that to your membership. So there's some considerations. How does real-time voting work? Well, it works exactly the same way as online proxy voting, but with two key differences. Firstly, the voters won't see any option to choose a proxy. Of course, they'll see the resolutions, but they won't be able to say, well, I want to nominate somebody to cast my vote, because they're doing it in real time. So that element of choosing a proxy and nominating somebody is not on the online system. And that voting opens and closes dynamically as the chair decides. So they're the two main differences compared to the proxy voting process that I've previously described. We're coming to the end of this session, so just a few slides left. So there are some potential benefits that it's worth noting. So all of these processes that you're doing in terms of streaming the AGM, or doing online voting, or proxy online voting, or whatever these digital processes you're bringing into play, they do increase transparency and accountability. People get to see what's going on, and they get more involved potentially. So yeah, that's a good potential benefit to raise that profile. You could potentially, as a byproduct of this, end up opening up more digital engagement channels with the membership and the key stakeholders. It may be that they see how this works, the organisation becomes a bit more digitally engaged, and people start communicating more digitally. So, there's a lot of cost savings and benefits to be had there moving down that road. You can also learn, of course, which demographics are engaging or not. Remember, there was a turnout statistic dashboard that give you some information. You could potentially track which demographic sets of your membership are actually getting involved in this process and which ones aren't. So that's quite interesting. So you can sort of obtain that information to help you decide how you want to engage with your members moving forward. Because an independent organisation is likely to be undertaking the voting process on your behalf, then there is independence and security of the voting processes. So, if people think, it's sort of a little bit biased in some way, or they have that perception it is, well, you could amplify the fact that independent organisations are running these processes in a secure and transparent manner, so that any element of bias is completely removed out of any process for voting. And you may see in the first instance, of course, it might drive turnout for your AGM. You might get a lot more people voting at your AGM that weren't previously interested or involved in that. Some people may just be curious to determine what's going on digitally and get involved. Finally then, in summary, some key points from this presentation. So really worth going back and checking your articles or your constitution, your wording, looking for those key phrases and key aspects that determine if you're a hybrid or a non-hybrid. Remember that all members can vote remotely in that proxy process up until 48 hours before the AGM. So that's a real key aspect. Whether you're hybrid or non-hybrid, everybody gets the opportunity to vote if you have a proxy voting process. You must have a valid AGM for the votes to be counted. You could get challenged if you do something completely different to your AGM. You could end up in court. I don't know. It's not to be too dramatic about it, but there are no case precedents so far on this because this is all new. So, having a valid AGM, or as much as you can have a valid AGM, reduces the risk to organisations that there'll be any challenges moving forward. And lastly, you may or may not be able to allow members to vote remotely at the meeting. So it's clearly based on your articles, and if you can, great, the technology's there and it's proven, etc. There are companies that do that. If you can't do that, then the proxy voting process is the way forward to get members involved in voting. So thank you for your time. Hope you enjoyed learning about the AGM aspects during this particular period of COVID and movement restrictions. My details are here. We'd be very pleased to talk with anybody directly if you've got any concerns or questions or comments. Thank you so much indeed.